people are looking around the gym for the right piece of equipment, or, choosing their 3 exercises, whatever they do for that day, to work, quote unquote, back when they're doing stuff. And I think they lose sight of all the things that are going on back there. I mean, it's a really complex structure. It doesn't have to be complicated, but there's a lot of things going on there. And to your point, I know a lot of people that have shoulder issues anyway, because of whether they're lifting correctly or not, right? When I say correctly, just, using good shoulder mechanics, or pulling mechanics, maybe is the more generalized term here. But they're involved in activities that limit or restrict shoulder movement and mechanics anyway, or can exacerbate, maybe an already existing condition. And that could be anything from sitting a lot, driving in the car or whatever, because a lot of people spend a lot of time at a desk. I spend way more time at a desk now in the last 5 years than I have in my previous 44 years or whatever, as I'm nearing 50. So those things contribute too. So we kind of have to unravel that. We have to kind of look at what our body is doing on a regular basis. And when we do choose movements or exercises to do, like, what can we do to kind of overcome that or untangle that sticky web? So again, I think that gets overlooked. Alongside that, people get lost in what I was saying is with the exercise, like going to try to find a machine or a piece of equipment that, quote unquote, targets the back without thinking about things in a larger perspective. Like, what else is the back involved in, when you're not pulling? And you mentioned one, which is pushing, and I want to come back to that, or pressing. So whether it's horizontally out in front of you overhead, like an overhead shoulder press or something like that. But those muscles are always firing whatever you're doing. Whenever you have a load in your hands, your back is working. So keeping that in mind when you're entering into whatever exercise selection or whatever workout you happen to be doing for the day is super important. And I think people lose sight of that. Again, it's like, how much weight am I using? How many reps am I doing? And what is this exercise supposed to be targeting? Is it my lower lat? Is it my middle lat? Is it my upper lat? I think getting lost in the sauce is part of the understanding how your body actually functions. And I think that's a pitfall.
It's funny because your lower, middle, and upper lat, it's your latissimus dorsi. It's not like your upper, middle, or lower trapezius where you actually have different origins and
we're talking about the lat. Yeah. So there's a lot of other muscles back there. But again, that's what I mean about people getting lost in the sauce. Let's dial this back a little bit. Where are we on our journey? What are we actually trying to get accomplished here?
Yeah. So I think it's just, there's benefit to isolation, whether it's, breaking a movement down into its constituent parts for someone who's maybe a little bit more novice. And then there's isolation if you are a bodybuilder and you want to bring up your rear delts or something like that. Like how do you isolate and focus on specific muscles, and that can change maybe the general guidelines of a pulling movement or a back exercise, depending what you're really targeting.
Right.
But so yes, you need to do some isolation, but for a lot of people, you also need to learn how to integrate. You need to integrate a functional or a mechanically robust movement with the shoulder when you're pulling. How do you integrate getting retraction and depending on the positioning and retraction of the shoulder blade, pulling the shoulder down and back as you're also then pulling through the arm, and that where you get good lat engagement, but you don't get compression on the front of the shoulder, which a lot of people get. And that goes a lot into pressing. I think when you're talking about people not using their back in pressing, it's not necessarily that it's the driver, right? Because it's working the opposite end of gravity with it. It's not pushing against it, but the positioning, really, if you get into that open chest position for a press, it should look like that open chest position of a pull. So that tissue needs to be able to pull the shoulder blades in to open the front of the shoulder to allow a better stretch on the pec, but then also to not compress the front of the shoulder to allow you to get a good healthy press. So a lot of people that get like shoulder impingement or like bicep tendon irritation or like things like that, a lot of that comes when they come down to the bottom of a press and they're not engaging their back or they're pulling their shoulder blades back, and then they get this compression and this pain. So a lot of that, all this stuff is mechanics. What are your mechanics? That's going to get you the biggest back initially, is what are your mechanics in that?
Yeah, again, it just goes back to those foundational principles that we're talking about. And I didn't want that to get left unsaid and get right into the next thing, which is if I'm choosing movements to build strength and size, like hypertrophy, look, the basics and fundamentals work there too. Lift heavy, right? And stimulate, again, heavy is relative, but lift heavy enough to create an adaptation that gets you the result that you're looking for. And again, I think people are looking for like well, where's the back machine? And there's a lot of great ones out. There's tons of them. I mean, I go into a ton of gyms. I say this all the time. Like one of my favorite gyms on the planet is Santa Cruz Power Fitness. They're actually building a brand new gym up there.
Cool.
Super excited for my friends, Chris and Camille up there, and their entire like family of people and membership up there. They're going to get this great brand new facility. But my point of that is they have an immense amount of equipment, and there's a lot of thought that's gone into how do we choose the right pieces of equipment to impact our membership base and the types of members that come in there in the right kind of way. And that said, the equipment that you're using does matter. However, it's going back to the very foundational, fundamental things of like, let's lift heavy enough to create this stimulus that then creates an adaptation. What are some of the ones that I think people overlook or don't give credit to? I'm gonna give you 3. And I think these are again, very foundational movements. You need to be doing them all the time, but you should be proficient in them, and they should enter into your journey at some point. And if you're not, then I'm going to say you're coming up short if you're trying to build strength and size, particularly in your back. And the first one I'm going to choose is the deadlift. I cannot think of a better way to impact all the muscle in your back at the same time, right? Under an immense amount of tension. Again, that's relative, to build everything and including improving shoulder mechanics. Yeah. And that's the deadlift. It's an amazing exercise. And the reasons for that is the huge amount of central nervous stimulation that goes on there, which then the neuromuscular stimulation that comes from that, and placing that bar or dumbbell, whatever. But I'm going to stick with the barbell deadlift because it's when you fix those hands onto that bar and you retract those shoulder blades into that position where you're like in a neutral spine. And it doesn't always have to be like that. I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying you have to be in a neutral spine every time. There are plenty of times and places where you're not going to be neutral. I'm totally fine with that, as so long as you can control it. Yeah. Right. And there's control, stability, and mobility there. That exercise could be my top pick for building a bigger, stronger back. Where do you guys want to weigh in on that?
I mean, I completely agree. Not to pat myself on the back, but I would say deadlifting is probably my strongest lift. Like, I think I'm pretty proficient at it. And that when I've like developed that, and I think I'm also pretty proficient at engaging my back, engaging my lats specifically in a big pull, which has a lot of implications for whether you have a successful deadlift or not. And so when I'm really rigid and I'm doing that and I've pulled some of my heaviest numbers, it's the development that I've got, the pure just strength that I've got is huge. That comes from that for sure. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we want to pull out the science there, so, I mean, they've done EMG studies where they've looked at different types of lifts and how much of your musculature is engaged. And it comes back to the deadlift. So when you're doing a deadlift, a heavy lift, everything in your body is working. So I'm not surprised that, of course, the deadlift is going to be one of the biggest back builders.
For sure.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, the guys with the biggest deadlifts are also going to have the biggest backs. Yeah. It's just, it's that equates at the end of the day.
And the thing is that you don't have to do a heavy deadlift because it's all the time to get a big back, but it's all the work that comes up to the point of being able to do that heavy deadlift.
To have the capacity, to have the capacity in your back to be able to perform a heavy deadlift already takes prerequisites. Like there's a reason that we've talked about we don't start someone on a barbell deadlift from the floor day one if they're super novice. But as the back, it's a kind of an ultimate integration of like the total strength and stability and ability to stabilize of your back into a movement. You're applying it into that movement. So
I love what you said, that like the ultimate integration. So if you're looking for like efficiency, right, and trying to save time and get the most bang for your buck, get those deadlifts in, right? And particularly the barbell deadlift. It's an awesome one. And I've been public and I've said, like, I think it's an overrated lift for a lot of reasons. Not for this. Yeah. Not for this.